Yacht A. Hello, I'm Nyomi, and today I'm going to be sharing my experience growing cherry tomatoes from seed, as well as some red chili and sweet tomato seedlings that were gifted to me from a wonderful garden and Shannon this summer. I'm also going to be giving you the inside scoop on the indigenous history behind these great agricultural staples. Two recipes I used my produce in that I think you would love. But back to the story, after I had harvested them, one of the most satisfying thoughts occurred to me, and it was the fact I could make my own salsa and include the chilies in one of my favorite easy dishes, tamale pie. I shared the results with Shannon, and she helped me realize how physically and mentally empowering the whole process was from start to finish. I had a lot of ups and downs growing them, but the knowledge I acquired far outweighed the inconsistencies. It all started in one of the Indigenous Youth Regenerative Agricultural classes that Shanoa and Shannon Francis taught. They taught us how to talk and transfer revitalizing energy into the seed. Then we made germination necklaces so that the warmth of our bodies sped the process up. This is one of my favorite concepts learned in the program because it helped me understand even more the importance of outlining and guiding the energy we put out into existence. So, after the class, there were seed bags being handed out, and I had seen my own favorite fruit, cherry tomatoes. So, best believe when I got back home, I quickly started getting a hold of any soil I could find, and that's when I realized that my passion for food sovereignty was coming back, and that's how I started gardening. But first, I would like to introduce myself before we get into anything else. I am Danae. I am 19 years old and was born in Shiprock, Mexico. I have a passion for photography. I love sunsets. I love my doggo Bruno, and I love taking time out of my day to find ways that I can learn more about my community or help out my community. And that is one of the greatest things that happened to me this year was being a part of Spirit of the Sun. Let's get started. The beginning of tomatoes. This was a little controversial at first, but the actual events eventually came out, and now we know who really invented the cherry tomato. So the exact origins are a mystery to this day, but based on genetics, it said that they were developed in the Andes Mountains more than 80,000 years ago. And as it slowly climbed up towards Mesoamerica, the Incas and Aztecs domesticated it. And it made a whole different species around 700 AD. And when they were exploring, they took some back to their country, and that's when they really were exposed to the public. And a British grocery CEO noticed its demand and noticed how fast they would decompose. So he tasked some Israeli scientists to figure out how they could make it last longer, but they eventually made a stiffer, moister tomato that held its structure way better. And it just was history from there, and that is the cherry tomato that we know today. And a really cool system that I learned while going through this history was these islands that the Aztecs would make, which would create a perfect condition for gardens and crops of all sorts. And they were basically makeshift land islands, and they would do this by creating a hydroponic system that they called chinampas. This allowed them to lay the raft structures made out of reeds and rushes at the base here. They would layer it with canal silt to keep them in place. And these roots would thrive and grow submerged in the water. And there were such pros at it that no matter how heavy the crop got, they cultivated it and let it prosper, and it never sank. That was mind-blowing to me. Cherry tomatoes are very abundant in micronutrients, and there's a list of it all, but to narrow it down for you, the main ones are potassium, phosphorus, manganese, and calcium. Vitamin A is also another main one, which strengthens eye health, activates the production of white blood cells, which supports strong cell production and is a base to create other antioxidants like beta carotene. And it is also an excellent source of lycopene, which is a compound that helps prevent inflammation. On the topic of the notorious blue corn, let's talk about the benefits of it all and how far back it goes. Lots of different cultures have created artifacts made out of ceramics. When the Hopis cultivated it, they made a lot of traditional recipes which represented corn, and I thought it'd be cool to include the original ancient purple corn. It also has lower starch levels, which makes it fall on the lower scale of the glycemic index, which means that it will cause fewer sugar spikes and crashes. And the pigment that makes it blue is a antioxidant called anthocyanin, and it is very strong, very beneficial for the body. It reduces blood cholesterol and problems that result from the excess of harmful fats. But I wanted to get you familiar with the levels NPK, which stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. This it's part of the main nutrients that a plant needs to live. So live. So every fertilizer is going to have these three numbers, and it's a ratio. So, for example, if I have a 100-pound bag that has 10, 10, 10, it's going to have 10 pounds each of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And this gives you an idea of how strong the fertilizer is, which is very important because you can burn your foliage if it's too strong. And that's why for cherry tomatoes, 573 is the best rounded number for it because the Chiles, for example, have a whole different number, and that's because to put it in contrast, the chilies that I grew had an NPK of 15, 11, and 15, which was very ideal because the chilies really need a lot of nitrogen too, and it's very helpful so that you don't end up burning your plant. I grew in my apartment And outside, mostly outside, I was strenuously lugging around, but passionately, my pots because I was moving it with the sun, and my chilies as well. Okay, I have combined the top six tips that I believed got me through a semi-successful harvest. The first thing is to figure out if it's a determinate or indeterminate, which means that determinate seeds have a set height that they stop at and they just start blooming, as opposed to an indeterminate, which wildly grows and is much better planted in a garden. The next one is to always transplant deep into the pot, because at the end of the day, they're going to get so dense and it's going to grow so fast that if it's any higher, it's just not going to have a good support system. Thick thread to weave it in and out so that it can hold it up. But the best thing to do, which didn't do in the beginning, was support the growing plant as it's going up, so it has something to lean on. And it just makes for better space, and you don't have to realign everything after everything grows. So after that is the minimum of 6 hours of sun, because they love the sun. Their chlorophylls are dancing whenever they're beaming under the sun. They will have so much more flavor the longer they stay in the sun. To keep a watering schedule consistent and aligned with the weather. If it's hot, water every morning in the summer. If it's a little on the spring side and it's raining every so often, you only need to water it a couple of weeks. After you find out the perfect schedule and just make sure it's adaptive to the climate, there shouldn't be any budding problems, because I did have that problem at first, but once you get that water going and it's flowing great, it's going to be fine. At the at the bottom of your pot, there's usually a plate that catches the water. Don't let the water sit there, because it can cause whatever's catching the water at the bottom isn't sitting there longer than like 30 minutes, because it'll start root rot, and we do not want that. It'll kill the whole plant if it's just sitting there. As it's growing over a foot, make sure you're pulling the bottom leaves off, because that will make it more prone to catching soil disease and just spreading it everywhere. This is my main 6 tips, because along with my experience with growing indoors with some light assistance was pretty great. I would just recommend making sure you check your plants every time you take it in and out, because I did catch some aphids during the end of my harvest and I didn't notice, and they just clobbered everywhere, and I had to throw them all out. Diluted to water method, and that one worked great for me with the little minor aphids that I did get. My tomatoes could have done better, but I didn't have a big enough pot for it. Let it spurt out into its fullest. But my cherry tomatoes were the biggest ones that I've ever seen in my whole life, so I was very proud of that. If you see leaves that are deteriorating, it's best to take them off as soon as possible, because they're just taking more nutrients. My next slide is going to touch base on the importance of making sure you're conscious of what you're using. I am very invested in food sovereignty, so I thought I would just give a little insight on how you can help. Existing relationship with the world and Mother Nature will deplete more rapidly if our sacred responsibility to nurture our relationship with the plants, land, and animals isn't upheld. Our ancestors did whatever they could to give back to her. We should be aware as possible when consuming produce or trying to grow our own. Fertilizers and chemicals have many negative effects on the environment just as much as it does to us internally. It is scientifically proven organic crops retain more nutrients than something grown conventionally. I found a really great quote that I resonated with, which was that food sovereignty is an affirmation of who we are as indigenous peoples and a way, one of the most sure-footed ways to restore our relationship with the world around us. With that being said, I would like to end this video by thanking you for listening and taking your time to take in some information. And I hope this inspires you or at least gets you motivated to try some type of gardening. And I hope you have a great day. Hogone. Florbid.